Good evening. Nope. Let me try again. Good morning. It is good to see you out here. Once we get settled in, we'll understand what time of day it is. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate every single person that's here. It's really encouraging to see your presence. A lot of visitors, happy that you're here. If it's your first time, welcome. If it's not your first time, welcome. So glad that you could be here and assemble with us. We hope that what we're doing here is being pleasing to God. That is our ultimate goal, and we're trying to help each other get to heaven, and I hope that you can be part of that as well. This morning, we are going to be looking at 1 Peter. We've actually been looking at 1 Peter for the past 6 weeks or so. This is lesson 6 of 6 of a study through 1 Peter, and specifically focused on a statement that's made in the final chapter in one of the last verses in 1 Peter. 1 Peter 5:12, as we are very familiar with this point, the end of the verse. I've written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. We have discussed a lot of things about the grace of God. Now, here, the ultimate thing that he says here is that we need to stand firm in it. That the grace of God is something that we stand firm in. And the grace of God isn't what a lot of people expect the grace of God to be. We've seen so many things, as we say every time, throughout 1 Peter that doesn't sound to us like grace. How many people love to suffer? Yeah, that's what we talked about the past 2 weeks. How many people like to submit? That's also not something that people enjoy doing. What about living a holy life, being set apart for the Lord and changing our behavior and doing the right thing? Those are all difficult things, especially in the face of ridicule and that kind of thing. Let me ask you something. Has anyone in here ever been just humiliated? Like, I think everybody has like a story or an event, something that happened that just you think back on and you just cringe and it's just, man, that was terrible. Now, why do we get that way? How is it that we are humiliated? Sometimes what is really happening, what's going on here, is that someone else is thinking of us lower than we think that they need to think of us. And really that's what it comes down to. And this idea of humiliation, of being humiliated, do you know what the root word of that is? Humility. And humility is actually a godly attribute and is going to be the title of this lesson today, the true grace of humility. How is it that being humble, that having humility is a grace of God? Because a lot of times we don't look at it as a grace of God. But Peter says it is. And there's a lot of things that we need to think about when it comes to humility. Now, Peter's going to start somewhere interesting in the first 5 verses of chapter 5. He's going to start with elders. And you might think, why would we do that? Like, why are we starting there with elders? That's a kind of a strange leap, especially where we have been. We've been talking about the past 2 weeks about suffering. And there's a lot of suffering that we have to experience as Christians for various reasons. But you might think maybe he's talking to the elders specifically because, being in a leadership role, you might be more prone to suffering than other people. There might be a target on your back, so maybe there's that. Or maybe what Peter's getting at is that we have to understand when we are going through suffering and we are experiencing these things, you know what really helps to get through that? Good leadership. And if we have good leadership that we can be humble and submit to, that will help us overall as Christians to be able to deal with a lot of the things that are going on in the world. So let's jump into 1 Peter chapter 5. We're going to read the first 5 verses together and we'll get started. Therefore, I exhort the elders among you, as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness, nor yet as lording it over those who are allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. You younger men, likewise, be subject to your elders, And all of you, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. For God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So he is specifically speaking to the elders here. And if you're careful, as you read these verses, you might notice that there are 3 different words that are applied to elders, and all 3 of them are used in this passage. And so we'll talk about that as we go along. But what we notice here is that Peter calls himself a fellow elder. And so he's speaking to the elders and saying, listen, guys, I know what you're experiencing because I've been there too. This is something that I am very well acquainted with. And so his advice is coming from a place of experience. He's experienced some of these things, so he is sharing that with them. And he mentions that he was a witness of the sufferings of Christ and partaker of the glory that's to be revealed. When he says he's a witness of the sufferings, I don't think he's just, I saw it. He experienced it as well. And so he is a good example of someone who experienced the suffering and also was able to deal with that in such a way. It's always this way. We experience suffering now so we can get the glory later. That's always how suffering works. And we've seen that the past couple of weeks. We won't belabor that point, but we see that. What else does he say about elders? What do elders need to do? Well, in verse 2, he says, you need to shepherd the flock of God among you. And that word shepherd is also the word where we get the term pastor. And so when you hear the word pastor, it's also referring to the job of an elder. It's what they're doing. They pastor, they shepherd the flock of God. And notice, it says that they shepherd the flock of God. It doesn't just say that they shepherd the flock. Why do you think that's important that he mentions that? Because we understand the elders, that they don't own the church. You know what I mean? So the flock of God is the church that belongs to God. If someone who was like really important, really rich or powerful or whatever, wanted you to come over and like house sit for them, how would you take care of that house? Like, would you say, oh, it don't really matter, you know, we could sort of trash it, I'll try to clean it up before he gets back, but you know, no, like a lot of times we would see that and think, man, we really need to take care of this because this guy that I'm watching it for, he's pretty important and I want to do a good job for him. That's kind of what he's talking about here with the elders. The elders look at the flock of God, the church, as belonging to the Lord. And so when you understand that that's who owns the flock, it changes the way and your perspective of how you look at them. What do shepherds do? Well, in general, with sheep, you understand shepherds take care of the flock. They feed them, make sure that they are provided for. They watch out for danger and watch out for like wolves and things that are coming in. And so shepherds, in a very real sense, help us as people, as individuals, notice the dangers that are around us. They help warn us of what's to come. And they help us to see the sin in our own lives, and so we could avoid that, be filled with the message of God. And you understand also, what kind of sheep do you think the shepherds have to pay very close attention to? Probably those that have the greatest needs, right? When Jesus talked about, there was a guy, shepherd, who had 100 sheep, 99 of them were perfectly fine. There was only one that had a problem. It wandered off. And so you remember what Jesus said about that one sheep. That's not a big deal. We still got 99. No. He said he left the 99 to go get that one. And that's the kind of attitude that we have and we should have with our shepherds. The shepherds are watching over the flock, and especially the ones who need the most help, the most encouragement, the most guidance. And so we see that in some very real ways of how they take care of the flock. Now, it's more than just shepherding as well. You notice another word he uses here in verse 2. After he said, shepherd the flock of God among you, he says, exercising oversight. Another term that's used for elders a lot is overseer. This is also where the word bishop comes from. So there's so many words that are talking about the same job, same task, same responsibility. There's a little bit of different flavor with these words, though. When you see overseer, you might think of something like a superintendent. Someone who they're in charge, and they have to make sure that they're guiding people that they're leading people and instructing people on what they need to do. There's a little bit more of there's a sense of authority here, and that we have to submit to that. Would you agree that elders do have the authority to tell us as the flock of some things that we should do and watch out for in our lives? Now, I think that's part of that job, that role, and that responsibility. Does an elder have a right to tell you what to do in your personal life? Think about that. We have our life at church, and we have our life, our worship, what we do collectively, but our life at home, that's our private business, right? Like it has nothing to do with what we're doing here. Now, some of you, by your face, you know what I'm saying here. No, we're Christians all the time, right? And so if there are things in our life that we have to watch out for, that the elders see as, man, this you really probably shouldn't be going to this place, or you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be so involved with that. This job, I don't know if that's such a good idea for you. This person that you want to marry, I don't think that's going to be good. I don't think that's going to work out. I think in those situations too, we should listen to that advice because they are the ones who have been given watch over our souls. And our spiritual life is much more than what we do in this building. Our spiritual life, our relationship with God goes everywhere that we go. And we have to remember that. So don't be surprised when you've got some of those things. Now, something that's mentioned here, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily. It's not good if we have like reluctant shepherds. We just have to have you. There's no other choice. You got to do this. This work of a shepherd, of an elder, is something that is very voluntary. It's something not under compulsion. And the very reason that you do it is because they need, we understand sheep need a shepherd. And that's why we have that role in here. But remember, what's the whole purpose of these series of lessons? What's the phrase that we've been talking about? The true grace of God? Is it, elders, you don't have to answer out loud for this or anything, but elders, would you say, when you're thinking of your job, your role as a shepherd, as overseer, we make it pretty easy for you, right? Like, there's no sheep that cause you any trouble. Like, we're all pretty willing and submissive, and we all always do the right thing, so your job is pretty easy, wouldn't you say? If they're honest, they would say no, and I know you're honest. So they're going to say, no, that is not always easy. Sometimes people are doing things that they shouldn't, and they have to have awkward conversations and have to talk about some of those things. Well, that is challenging, and so what do we do with that? Well, we understand that job, even though it is difficult, it's challenging, that's a grace of God. And it's a grace of God that they have been given this role, but also for the ones of us who are submitting to their role as elder and authority. Now, specifically, he says here that they live their lives as an example to the flock. Verse 3, not lording it over them, not just some kind of power-hungry, you have to do what I say that you have to do. But it's more of a guidance out of love and an example that we can look at to say, okay, this is what we should be as Christians. This is what we should do. Now, I've got to say, just on a personal level, I'm very thankful for our elders here. Just the 3 months that I've been here so far, I've seen a lot of times, a lot of examples where they are working behind the scenes. They're working in the lives of people, doing those hard things. And I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. And I think we all have to be aware of that and the example that they are. I got to tell you, sometimes we're not the sheep that we need to be. And we make their job hard sometimes. And so we got to remember that. But it's ultimately because we have the ultimate example of Jesus. We have here, when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. And so our shepherds are trying to emulate the great shepherd. And it's Jesus who's going to bring about that reward as well. He does mention a specific group of people, though, in verse 5, that need to submit to the elders. Well, first of all, who needs to submit to the elders? Just like some people?
Like everybody, right? That's something everyone is responsible for, submitting to the elders. But in verse 5, he says that you younger men likewise be subject to your elders. Why do you think he singles out younger men there? Because usually those are the most bullheaded, not willing to submit type of people. And don't get me wrong, older people, sometimes you can be unsubmissive too. But younger people, younger men especially, they tend to be a little bit more on that spectrum. So this is an instruction to be submissive, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. And here's also part of this. Our submission to the elders is also just kind of part of this whole thing where we are submissive to each other. In verse 5, be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. So we are all, in a sense, we're humbling ourselves before each other. And so our submission to the elders is just like a subsection of our humility and the way that we interact with just every Christian in general. And when we consider this, why does he tell us that we need to be humble and submit ourselves in humility to each other? Well, you might think, back in chapter 1, we talked about how we are part of a new birth. And because of our new birth, we have a new father. And what else came with that? New brothers and sisters, new family. And because of that, how do we act toward each other in our family? Hopefully, in a humble way, in a submissive way. Do you think that every single person in this room is always going to get their way when it comes to things with the church? Like, are you always going to, everything's going to be exactly how you want it to be? If you think that that's right, you're going to really struggle with this. Because in all actuality, it's not. In order to be part of a group of God's people, and I mean this works with families just in general, sometimes we have to understand, I want to do it this way, but that's not what's going to be best for everyone else. We have to be humble toward each other and submit to that in order to dwell together in unity. Our goal is unity, not getting our own way. And that's really what being humble will lead us to, and what humility is all about. Do you notice at the end of verse 5, it talks about how God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble? If you didn't notice, that was the magic word of 1 Peter, grace. How do we receive more grace? What's the way? How do we grow in grace? Well, this verse seems to connect growing in grace, getting more grace, is associated with being humble. So the more humble we are, the more that we experience the true grace of God. If we want to stand firm in the true grace of God, you know what we're going to have to stand firm in? Humility, being humble. And that's hard. That is very challenging. But that's what he says that we need to do. We need to submit ourselves, cooperate, get along, and that's how we're going to grow into that. I should probably mention here as well, we've used the word humble and humility. What does that actually mean? Like I think you all know probably the definition that we give a lot of times. Being humble is not thinking about yourself less. No. Yes, it is. Let me try that again. Being humble is not thinking less about yourself, but it is thinking about yourself less. So it's not saying that, well, I'm just horrible, I'm not good at anything, I'm terrible. No, like God made you special, and God gave you some talents and gifts and things that you need to be using in order, chapter 4, to serve others, to be an example and to encourage. And really, when it comes to humility, what we're looking at is using our talents, gifts, abilities, whatever God has blessed us with, in order to serve other people. Not worried about getting our own way, not worried about, what's in it for me. No, just forget about yourself there. Just think about how you could be of service to others. And there's where true humility comes in. If we're proud, if we're thinking too much, either too highly of ourselves or too lowly of ourselves, That's not going to work out. We need to humbly come before God and use our talents, gifts, and abilities to serve other people as well. There's a lot of things that stop us from serving others, though. I think that's what we get into in the next section. So let's read verses 6 through 11. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he might exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Be of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. So he says there in verse 6, therefore, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. How do we view that? Now, what does it mean to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God? We understand God has a mighty hand, right? Could God force us into obeying him? He has the power. He has that almighty hand. He could do that, but he doesn't. He gives us the free will choice to figure out whether we want to submit our lives to him, if we want to humble ourselves before him. But we remember, it's a mighty hand. He has a mighty hand. So that a couple things with that. Sometimes submitting to the mighty hand might not be comfortable because that mighty hand's a little harsh. But if you really think about it, have you ever been swimming? I mean, some of you probably have. If someone is drowning and you have like a lifeguard or someone who's a strong swimmer that is going out to save that person who's drowning, you know what they're going to tell the person who's drowning, what they should do in order so that they can help save them a little better? Stop flopping around. Like, don't fight. Just lay back. I've got you, and I'm going to get you to safety. Do you know what the last thing that a person who's drowning wants to do is? They don't want to stop, because it's just you get in panic mode, and you're just like flailing around, and you end up fighting against the person who's trying to save you. Does that sound familiar? Sometimes we don't let God do what he wants to do in our lives because we're not being humble and we're not really submitting to him. And that's what leads to some of this stuff we see in verse 7. Casting all your anxiety on him, for he cares for you. Where does anxiety come from? It's really usually from something I am trying to control in my life. But I actually don't have control in my life. And so I start thinking about all the things that I can't control. And I just get anxious and worried. And it's like, well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? Or, whatever. And we face those challenges and those situations, and we just get so anxious and worked up about it over things that we don't even have any kind of input on. We can't change. We can't fix. But you know who can? The Lord. He can. He can take care of all of those issues. And so really the key and secret to getting rid of anxiety in our lives is to be willing to submit to God and to be humble before him. Now, I'm going to be quick to say, just because we do that, does that mean that like our life's going to be perfect and everything's going to be fine and we're not going to have to experience anything? No, remember, like the past 2 chapters, suffering. We are going to suffer. You are going to experience that. But the thing is, we understand the duration, the time period of that suffering. God has a plan for us to deliver us from that, and eventually he will exalt us at the proper time. Notice he says that. If we humble ourselves, he will exalt us at the proper time. Not at the time that we want, or not on our own time frame, but when God deems that as what needs to happen. It's according to the will of God. This is a real challenge, though. How hard is it to actually submit to the Lord? And just to turn everything over and say, okay, listen, I'm not self-sufficient. I'm not the one who has got myself to the place I am now. It's the Lord. I think we all struggle with this. I know I do. And we need to see God as the one who has the mighty hand that we need to humble ourselves under And we can absolutely cast all of our anxieties on him. It's really about trust. Have you ever done a trust fall? I haven't. I've seen people who have done it. And what people will say is like, you have like team building exercises with a company or whatever, and you have somebody like standing up on a ladder or table, and trust fall is, I'm not going to do it. I'm actually going to step away because that's kind of scary. But I think this illustrates my point even better though. Like if y'all were like behind me and you said, okay, just fall and we'll catch you. Well, first I have to be able to trust you to do that. Hence the name trust fall. That's kind of scary. But what's the best way for me to fall? What I would have to do is just kind of stiffen up, just keep my body straight and just go. Just go all the way, all out. Because the second I start to I'm going to go like kind of try to catch myself, it's not going to work. And you are going to fall to the ground. In order to truly trust, you have to give yourself completely. And that's what it takes to trust the Lord. That's what true humility is. We give up on thinking that we can sustain ourselves and that we're the source of everything. The more we feel, the more the questions pop up in our mind, well, what am I going to do about this? Or how am I going to handle this? The harder the time is for us to trust in the Lord. We need to remember that He is the one who is delivering us through this. But here's the thing. Is there balance in that? Are there things that we need to actually be concerned with and actually watch out for? I think that's exactly why he leads into verse 8. Be of sober spirit. Be on the alert. Is there a difference between being anxious and being alert? Like, would you say that? Sometimes looking at someone, you can't really tell. Like, are they anxious? Are they alert? I don't know. Like, it's kind of hard to tell from an outsider's perspective. Think of it this way. If you see someone who is an anxious driver, can you tell? If you see someone who is an alert driver, can you tell? Is there a difference? Like, sometimes it might look similar, but I think there's a major difference in there. How would you say an anxious driver drives? You probably wouldn't want to be anywhere close to them. But how would you say an alert driver drives? They're aware of the danger. They're aware that other people in their cars might not be doing what they're supposed to be doing, so I'm going to keep my eye on that. Or I'm going to keep my eye on the storms or the rain or whatever the situations that are there, stuff in the road. And so they're kind of scanning and they're aware of everything that's going on. That is the kind of mentality he wants us to have. He says, don't be anxious. Like, don't always just be like, well, what if they do that? No, just be aware and just have your eyes focused and scanning, because what he says is that our adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Satan's not in it just to like minorly inconvenience us or even maim us. He wants to devour us. And we understand, remember what we've been talking about in the section before, shepherds? If there was a shepherd and sheep, and they understood that there was a lion on the prowl around them, how well do you think they're resting? How well do you think that they're just hanging out? No, they're always aware of that lion, and they know the danger is there. Do we understand that the devil is always on the prowl? Now, he calls him a roaring lion there, but do you know how lions hunt, like in nature? They don't just go around, roar, I'm going to get you. They hide. They get like underneath bushes and they hide like in the grass and like behind rocks or whatever, and they creep up on the gazelle, and then finally they pounce when they're close enough that they've escaped notice, right? And doesn't Satan try to do that to us? The thing is, we know what's coming. We know he's going to come after us. Why are we so surprised? Why do we let him get so close in our lives? I tell you, Jesus, our great shepherd, he knows exactly what kind of danger Satan is. And he warns us of that. And he wants to help us with that. But you know what we have to do as sheep? Don't wander off. Don't stray. We have to submit to him so that he can help us see those dangers and get past Satan. So we have to be aware. We have to be alert. Keep our eyes open and understand that all of the things we've been talking about in 1 Peter, all of the suffering, all of the submission that we have to do, all of the call to be holy, all of those things, the one who is working against us is Satan. He's the one trying to get us to not do those things. So the true grace of God is showing us, this is really what's happening. And so we, as Christians, as sheep, need to submit to that great shepherd who can help us to get through this. The other thing that he says about this, and I thought that this was interesting. Stuart brought this up in the Bible class this morning. He says, after you have suffered a little while, and Peter says that here in verse 10. After you had suffered for a little while, the God of all grace will grant you these things. How long do we have to suffer in our life? The whole time, right? Is that a little while? I mean, yeah, it is. It really is. In the whole grand scheme of things, there's something much greater that's waiting for us. And so any amount of suffering that we have to endure, I'm just going to say, some of you have suffered much longer than I have. Some of you haven't suffered as long. No matter what, we all have to experience that. Even if we have a lifetime that's full of suffering, from the day we're born till the day we die, and we just experience all that suffering, it's still, compared to eternity, it's just a little while. We can make it through that because we understand God is with us and God is delivering us through all of that. And that is a grace of God in that. Now, again, we're getting to this point where he's showing us, he's sort of wrapping all of this up together. He's taking everything we've learned in the book, putting it together. God himself is going to strengthen, confirm, establish, and perfect you. He's bringing you to this ultimate goal because he sees where you need to be. So let's think about that. He is going to, in verse 11, he's showing us that he is the one that is in charge, has dominion. Real quick, in the days of 1 Peter, when Peter was writing this letter, who did it look like had the dominion in the world? Like, why were the people so scared of suffering and all of these things? Their emperor at the time, Caesar, Nero, he was a bad guy. He was not a great guy. And they had to endure all that suffering. Who did it look like had the dominion? It looked like Nero did. They needed that reminder that no, it's not Nero who has the dominion, it's God. God has the dominion forever and ever. How much, we've all suffered, I get that. How much have you in your life been concerned about what Nero is going to do? He's not around anymore. What about just the nation of Rome in general? I mean, not at all. Now, we do have things that we suffer for and we're concerned about, but it's not them. No matter how big the problem seems in front of us, that problem isn't going to be a problem forever. Because the only one who truly lasts forever and has the dominion forever is the Lord. That's why we can humble ourselves before him and submit to him. Let's finish this book. Verse 12. Through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for so I regard him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings. So does my son Mark. Greet one another with a kiss of love. Peace be to all of you who are in Christ. So again, this verse, and we've talked about it a lot, but the final call in this is to stand firm in the true grace of God. All of what we've seen is the grace of God in our lives. And we need to understand that is what God has preserved for us. That's what he wants us to see, and that's what he wants us to hold on to. I want to try to make some connections, bring the book together, and the lesson will be yours. Do you remember who Peter wrote to originally? In chapter 1, he gives a very specific audience. He says, those who are scattered abroad, those who are exiles living in a foreign land, those who, and what we've said about that is, we realize our citizenship is actually in heaven, but our whole life, it's like we're pilgrims. We're just like moving around. We're aliens. We are weird compared to everyone else because we realize our true home is in heaven. That's where our loyalties lie, and that's what needs to be important to us. And so, again, the true grace of the new birth in chapter 1 gives us a new father, but also a new family. And that's why I think he ends this in verse 14, talking about how we need to show love to each other, how we're encouraging each other. You know, as Christians, we should be so excited to be around other Christians. It shouldn't be a thing where I'm going to worship service, I'm going to this event, but I've got to be around other Christians. No, like we're family, and we are the ones that should bond together and have the closest bonds because we are going to help each other and push each other and hopefully motivate each other to be able to stand firm in the true grace of God. We talked about our new identity that we have as God's chosen people in chapter 2, and we understand that because of what God did for us, we now are not born according to the flesh and according to this world, but we're born of the Spirit. And God has entered our lives and made us his chosen people. And because of that, we have those responsibilities. The same things he told the children of Israel in the Old Testament, that's our job now. We are God's people. And we're going to have to submit to the authorities. We're going to have to submit to each other. We're going to have to suffer in this world because of our choices of being a Christian and standing firm in what we know to be the truth. People aren't going to like that. But we're okay with that because we understand God is bigger than them. So in all of this, I hope that this study has been helpful for you. I hope going through 1 Peter just fills you with grace. It fills you with the knowledge that God is in control. No matter what happens in our life, no matter what situation we're in, God knows, he cares, he understands. What he wants is our obedience. So this morning, if you need to do anything to make yourself right with the Lord, to obey him, to give your life to him, whether that's becoming a Christian, putting him on in baptism, whether it's you are a Christian and you've wandered away, we want to assist you in obeying the Lord. That's our greatest goal, and that's what we want to help you with. So please come forward as we stand and sing.